right, WilSpec wiring is back in the house. What can I say? It's been a while. Those of you that follow me for my wiring stuff, I know that some of you are, because my most watched video by a long shot was a boring wiring video. Strip all the loom off of it and get it down to the bare wires, and then never saw that coming. The story today is Adam Spragen and Spragen Built Customs. He contacted me a while back and asked me, hey man, can you help me get some wiring through the firewall of one of my projects a little bit cleaner? To which I said, yeah, I can. So I went out to look at this truck. It is one of the sickest trucks I've ever seen. It's an early 60s International Loadstar put onto a Ram 3500 dually, obviously Cummins turbo diesel chassis, stretched 3 feet, slammed on its nuts. Yeah, I absolutely want my work on this truck. So that's what we're doing today. So where does a project like this start, Brett? Well, everyone's favorite place, an Excel spreadsheet. But before we dive right into that sheet, we gotta talk about this real quick. This is, oh my word, that didn't go well. A painless performance automotive wiring solution. Essentially what this is just a universal wiring harness for your project. Everything is labeled, it is literally painless. So if you're looking for a quick and easy way to wire a project, doesn't have any wires in it, you're looking at it. All right, so the first thing I did is I went out to Adam's shop and talked to him and said, all right, man, what from this painless harness do you need to come through this firewall? And he said, well, I need all of these things to come through on the painless harness, but I also need these things for the engine computer to come through the firewall as well. I was like, all right, cool, no problem. Which side? And he said, well, I need all of these things to come through the left. I want all of these things to come through the right. And then of course, we got the accelerator pedal position. This is obviously going to come through the left as well. So now that I've spoken to Adam, what I need to do is I need to look at the wire size, right? So go through Painless's book and look. I've got on the driver's side 18, 16, 14, 12, and 8 basically coming through here. So that's cool. I need different size pins. No problem. So I looked online at these types of connectors, right? These are called AERO connectors. They are basically MIL-SPEC, really high dollar. They're very nice, they're super strong, and they're extremely durable. Now, looking at those connectors and my options, I basically came to the conclusion I need all of the 18s and 16 gauge wires to all go through these holes out here. The problem is these pins are all 22 to 18 gauge accepting, meaning the 18 gauge can pass straight through one pin to one pin. The 16 gauge, however, is not going to fit in here, so I have to break it out into two 18 gauges to bring it through the connector, rejoin it into one 16 gauge, and then send it wherever it's going. No problem. So I did that for all the 18s and 16s, and I found out that I need X amount, whatever it was, to come through this connector, and I think it left me with like 5 left over, 4 or 5 left over. Cool, we got all those through. We got 5 leftovers in case we want to add something later. Perfect. Now we got to look at these fatties. So I've got a 14 gauge that needs to come through. There are 6 pins in the middle of this connector that are 14 to 12 gauge accepting. What that means is I can pass the 14 through 1 to 1. I can pass the 12 gauge through 1 to 1. However, the 8 gauge here, I'm going to need 4 14 gauge pins, wires, 2 pins to come through this firewall. So 3 is probably enough, but 4 is overkill, and that's kind of what I want on a main power. There's going to be some current going through that, so I don't want the problem to be in the connector. Cool. We've got all 6 of the big pins filled up, 5 left over for some horsepower. If we want to add some, I don't know how diesels work. Anyway, now I got to figure out, let's plan where these are going to go. So first things first, I got the 6 big ones in the center. You always want to start in the center, which is kind of unfortunate because it starts with A here, goes around till you get to Z, and then it goes to lower cases. So you kind of do the alphabet backwards. So we're working with lowercase j here. First things first, we're bringing the starter wire dead through the center because it's a loaner. Now the main power, it is going A, C, E, and G through the center, which kind of orbits that center pin. And then we've got lowercase y, which is the coil coming through on top here. Then the rest of them go through in the capitals. Pretty easy. These were really easy because these are a different connector here. These connectors have 20 to 14 gauge pins, and all of these wires are between 20 and 14 gauge. These are all 1-to-1, no problem. So that's how you plan your pass-through in a bulkhead connector. And this can apply to any connector, not just these, but it really helps with these because these are very difficult to determine which one you need and where to bring the wires through and how many wires to break them out, blah, blah, blah. So you guys are gonna find out that these connectors, when they have like the 90-degree boot on them in race cars, there's a chance there is a lot going on inside those things. Still with me? So now that we've talked about this guy, it's time to break into this box. These are my favorite part. That is a 90-degree shrink boot. These things are awesome. The way they shrink is really cool. They're sick. These are the rings that those shrink boots attach to, and you can see on that ring there's a lip. When this shrink boot shrinks, it forms a lip that will actually bite into that and hold. Now those rings screw onto this guy. This is that 2295 with the big guys in the center that we just talked about. These are AERO connectors, and they are aluminum, and they're very, very strong, and I really like them, and they look really good. So we now have determined what connectors we need in Excel and gotten them. So what's the next step? Well, we got to attach them to the truck. All right, we are back on the iPad, and we are in a program called Shaper 3D. And I really like this program because it's very user-friendly and it seems tailored towards the kinds of things that I like to make. Basically just 3D printed brackets. So there's not a lot to describe here. It's pretty simple. What I did was kind of got on McMaster-Carr's site, figured out what kinds of bolts I wanted to use, and then recreated them in here just to see what this would end up looking like as a finished product. So as you can see, we've got these M6x1 bolts. I don't have the riv nuts on here, but they will go into a riv nut that's in the firewall of the truck. So we'll go ahead and get rid of those. Then as far as the connectors go, I've got those in hand, so I measured them with a pair of digital calipers and then recreated them in here just to make sure that I fully understood how to make this bracket. So we'll actually get rid of those as well. Then what we're left with is how do we mount those connectors to this bracket? You can't thread plastic, at least very well, and we want this to last. So what's our option? Well, if I get rid of these little M3 by 0.5 bolts, you'll see these little brass inserts here. These are actually called heat certs, and they've got teeth around the outside of them, and you heat them up and you push them into the plastic, and they essentially melt the plastic around those teeth and they become part of this bracket. Pretty simple, not a lot to it. I wanted to show you these connectors in 3 different states. The first one is, this is the 11 pin in its halves, and we'll talk about the plug side first. This cannot be wired in the basement because we have to bring the wires that go to this through the firewall of the truck, through the bracket, and then put them in the back of this, then put this into the bracket and bolt it down. So we will be cutting, pinning, and labeling the wires where they go in this connector here, but we won't be actually completing it here. We'll have to do that once we get to the truck. This is the socket side. We will be completing this here. So we can pin this, put the ring on it, and put a shrink boot on it, and then some length of split loom out of this, and then Adam, once he lays the harness out in the truck and figures out where everything needs to go, he'll complete the split loom from there. This example I've got here, this is the 16 pin. I just kind of wanted to show how these go together. So you can see that the socket has like a helical cut, groove cut into the ring there. Then these only go together one way. Once they're together, you just turn the ring and they align and pull themselves together and then snap into place. Then the last example here, this is the 2295 kit with the rings on it. Obviously I can't show you with the shrink boots just yet because we don't have the wires in it, but this is what the rings look like on there. They just screw on. These rings are $44 a piece. So the boots are like basically 15 bucks a piece, 10 to 15. So if you're wanting to put boots on these, you're looking at another $100 for sure. Each of these sockets and plugs comes with its own set of pins, and you'll see these are barrel crimp pins here. I will show you how to put those together. It does take a rather pricey tool that I'll show you how to put these together. Then just a simple insert and extract tool here to get the pins in and out of these. The extract tool is nice because sometimes you put your wire in the wrong spot. I think what we need to do is take my overcomplication down to my new wiring studio and get to work. Welcome to my new wiring studio. Not quite as cozy as my old one, but it's pretty awesome actually, because I was able to fit this 12-foot table in here, so that's really nice. There are a couple of drawbacks. The first one being that it's a storage room, not exactly aesthetically pleasing. The second is that my furnace is down here and it runs a lot. The most annoying though, this is my living room right here, and it's sunk into the house 14 inches. I'm 73 inches tall without shoes on, and I've got shoes on. These are 72 inches off the floor, so that kind of sucks. But I have a 12-foot table. Remember how in the Excel spreadsheet I told you that Adam wanted things to come out the left and right sides of the firewall? Well, they're not exactly laid out like that in this harness, and they all come through here or here. So what I need to do now is lay this thing out on this table, cut these zip ties, and lay those things out properly so that we can then cut them at the right length and start pinning them to their respective connectors. So that's what we're gonna do now.
Feels good to be back doing WilSpec, baby.
Involved and slightly less enjoyable than I thought it would be, but we got it done, and I learned a couple things about this harness, so it's actually going to be a little bit easier on the connector side than I thought. Also, big bonus, I finally found a use for these old Wilwood drag brakes that have never been used. They make a great wire spool. This is the reverse switch circuit, so basically this gets power when the ignition's turned on. And I had this coming through the connector we got to put in this branch of the harness, and I also had this coming through for both reverse lights. Well, what I learned is that this actually has a splice in here somewhere that breaks it out into two wires. So only one was coming through, but actually what happens is you turn the ignition switch on there. Power is then provided to that fuse box. Power then comes down to this wire to the reverse switch on the transmission. This applies the power from here when the transmission is put into reverse and trips that switch to the reverse lights. What that means is we now have two more open spots in that 2295 connector and two more pins I don't have to work on. So that's good. And I think honestly, that's really about it. I sent a video of this area to Adam and just ran through what's in there and made sure that he was good with it, that I didn't have to add anything or there weren't any changes to be made. So as soon as I get confirmation on that, we're snipping that bad boy and getting to work with the connectors. So in the meantime, while we wait, we're gonna take a look at these guys. So these are the brackets that we are going to use to mount these connectors to the firewall of that truck. Now, as you can see, there are the four mounting holes that go to the truck. Those are easy, through hole. Then we put a rib nut in the truck, we put a bolt through there, we bolt it down. There's a little bit of work that's required on the connector side though. We have to get these heat certs put into these holes so that we can bolt the connectors down, and then we have the little bolts here. We'll get to that in a little bit, but first what we need to do is we need to use a soldering iron to get these heat certs nice and hot, and then insert them into these holes, let them cool, and that will effectively create a threaded brass hole in this 3D printed part. And that is what you are left with after you put the heat certs into your carbon fiber plastic. The next step is to do an ASA acetone smoothing bath. This is a pretty interesting process. These are fully dried, and I'll be honest, they look even better than I thought they did in the light. So I am quite happy with the way that turned out. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna get these wires up here. We're gonna take these bolts out, double check that the connectors fit. If they won't, we'll sand out these holes just a little bit, and then we'll lay some sandpaper on this surface and run the back across it to smooth the back out. Time lapse. All right, so we got these units cleaned up. All the connectors fit through. I need to adjust that heat cert on this one. It's angled the wrong way just a touch, but otherwise the back is sanded clean. The front is polished. And these things look really good. So all that's left to do now is to get to work on the harness. So a little while ago, I got the green light from Adam that I could finally cut this harness. So as you can see, I did. Here's the finished product on this side for now. We cannot put this connector on here just yet because these pins have to come through the firewall, through this bracket, go into the connector, and the connector sets back into this bracket, at which point we can put the ring on, put the shrink boot on, and shrink it, angle everything, we're good to go. This side we could finish, and I could shrink this boot right now, but I'm not going to just yet because I want to make sure everything is good when this is on the truck. Now in here, the other side will be the same, but it's tough to see. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit. There are service loops in these wires, and you'll see me do that on the other side. The wire actually comes out, does a loop, and then continues on, and what that allows you to do is if you ever need to get in here to make a repair, you have a little extra wire to work with. So this is just covered up right now with the remainder of the shrink, or the split loom, and then depending on where the breakouts are, Adam can cut this, but I didn't want to, like, you know, put 2 feet on there and have him need 3 and have to, you know, wrap this in electrical tape to continue on. So this turned out pretty nice. It looks really good, and when the shrink boot goes on, it'll look really good. And I think we're in a good state right now to install this side on the truck. Next up, what I'm going to do over here, what you're going to see me do in the video, is work on this area. We're going to start specifically with pin J here, which is just a single wire to a single pin. However, these 4 here are the main power wire that's an 8 gauge, and these are 14 gauge pins. So what we're going to have to do is bring the main wire in, break it out into 4 wires that pass through here, and then on the other side rejoin it, but we'll cover that later. So this will be a good mix of both of the types of terminations that we'll be doing inside of this connector and this boot. And we need to strip this about 1 millimeter past where the pin will sit on it. It's perfect. All right, so the next step is to crimp a pin onto that wire. And for these types of barrel crimp pins, we need a tool like this. If we look on the side here, we are going to crimp a 12 gauge wire, and the only option for 12 gauge is yellow. So we need to set this to yellow, and then it says the selector number is 8. So then we switch this to 8. We will take this pin, drop it down in the hole, and just lightly grab it. Might be tough to see from your angle, but we slip the wire down into the tool, and then finish crimping. You get a perfect crimp every time with that tool. You never want to insert one of these wires like this because you'll crush the wire. This one's probably strong enough, but the proper way to do this is to use one of these guys. Now this has an extract and an insert tool on it. Extract is always white. This is the insert tool. Slip it over to here, click, and then you insert the pin until you hear a click, and there you go. Now the reason I started on this side with this pin in particular is because we're not completing this side. Remember, it needs to look like this when it goes in the truck because those wires have to go through the firewall. So the reason that I showed you this pin in particular first is because I wanted to show you how to use the extract tool. Push it down in until you hear an audible click. You pull it straight out. Now we're going to repeat the process on this side. Now this beast. this is going to be a little bit tricky. We actually need to trim this back, but not back so far that it's out of this boot. Just a little bit. This is why I use this cheapo tool with these, because I'm about to do some stuff I shouldn't be doing with it. Now I've got these 3 little strips of 12 gauge here. I was going to go with 14. We're going to see if 12 will work. This is where this bad chicken comes in. This is a hydraulic hand press that is meant to crimp these. So I usually use this for my bigger battery cable, but we're going to use it for this today. Now we're where we need to be. Okay, so that is crimped. So now what we need to do is put some insulation on that. We don't want that grounding out to the other crimps that'll be in here. Alright, so this stuff here is Sumitomo W5DL. This is the 1/4 inch stuff. This is my favorite stuff in the world because it is shrink wrap, but it's lined with like an RT125 based adhesive. Bending this is going to be a little tricky, so what we're going to do is I'm actually going to get the next wire in there, which is the coil wire. It should be this pink one here. We're going to go ahead and do that one real quick too, to get it in there. That way I can get the center section done at least, so we can bend these, because we have to get this up into the boot. This section right here is just a little bit fatter than I would have liked it to have been, but we can put the service loops for the other pins kind of back here to kind of fill this area. And then this is all going to need to turn about like that to come around that boot bend. Man, that 3-to-1 splice gave me a run for my money in there. It's not always pretty. Kind of wish it would have been in this situation, but those are some fat wires to be putting service loops in, but you got to put a service loop in them. So luckily, I don't think it's going to be too in the way of the other wires that are coming out of there, and we'll just put the service loops on those a little bit further back. All right, now you've seen the process here. You've seen what we need to end with over here. All that's left to do is keep working until this side looks like that. Let's get it. Bigger gauge wire is a real bear to wrangle in there. There are service loops in every single one of these so far. I will be going back through and organizing them a little bit. Some of them aren't exactly super tidy, so I'm going to tidy that up a little bit. Then we're going to wrap this in a bunch of Kapton tape. We'll get the split loom up to about here, get the boot on it, get the ring on it, and basically get it into this condition. And then we'll pin and splice these, and at that point, this thing should be ready to put back on the truck. So I think we're nearing the end of this one finally, but we got a little bit more work to do. just like that. This one's ready to go in the truck. We've got the boot on here, got some zip ties to keep it from falling off in the meantime, and this and its spool right here will just go on top of the other one. And now what we've got to do is prepare this to look like this. So we're pretty close to done here. This painless harness in this condition is what I'm about to deliver back to Adam to put on this build that he's working on. Now, these kinds of things here are things he's responsible for. This stuff's all staying up in the dash, and he knows more about the truck side than I do. So this is stuff that goes to like the headlight switches, the wiper switches, you know, things like that. These are the inputs that control the fuse box that then control the outputs over on this side. Now, this connector here just controls the right side forward. This is like your right side headlight, turn signal bulb, stuff like that. There's some engine temp stuff on the right side of the engine that goes into here. But mainly this is right side of the truck forward. Now this is left side of the truck forward, as well as some left side inputs on the engine. But a lot of this stuff is like the rear lights that will turn, hook under the firewall and head to the back of the truck, which is why the transmission reverse switch is in here as well. Then once he gets this stuff laid out on the truck, like I said before, he can cut this wherever, but I didn't want to cut this short and, you know, leave him with a, you know, electrical tape splice in the middle of this somewhere you could see it, because this looks really clean right now. So I want to keep it that way, and I'll let him make that cut. But essentially, this is what he's getting for now. And then we'll get it in the truck, and we'll basically finish every single piece except for these boots until we prove it out, make sure everything's good. As soon as that's good, we'll put a little bit of time on it, and then we'll shrink them down and be done with it. So just like any of my videos, I hope you enjoyed this, but if you didn't, I hope you at least found it informative. I know these wiring videos can be a little bit mundane as I navigate the how to do things with your wiring, so I hope you at least found it informative. That being said, part 2 of this video should be much more entertaining because we're going to be at Adams working on the actual truck. So we'll have another personality there. We'll be working on this incredible monstrosity that he's built. It's a beautiful truck, and it's worth looking at, and it's worth joining his channel as well to see him build this thing. But yeah, that being said, guys, I appreciate you hanging out for part 1. We'll see you in part 2.